My name is Melissa Riddle with Hyperion Research, and I'm going to talk about ISV and open source application growth. So ISV software is independent software vendors. Basically, it's applications that are paid for, usually requiring software licenses. And open source applications in general are applications that are free to use and download. And both of these application types are growing. They have their own metrics. So since ISV are paid for, their primary metric is revenue. So the spending has been increasing and is expected to increase this year. And the main reason for this is that HPC workloads are also growing. So since a lot of sites are trying to differentiate their HPC resources with accelerators or specialized hardware for AI, for example, the average number of systems per site is actually growing. And that leads to more software licensing. And similarly, as average workload size is increasing, it's also because of widespread cloud growth. So that's also leading to additional software licensing required in the cloud. On the open source side, the main measure of success here is use as percent of workload, and that's growing. Once again, it's being fueled by cloud growth and GPUs. ISVs can be really challenging in the cloud. Sometimes they're not available or they can be too expensive. So this is kind of causing some users to look towards open source. And similarly with GPUs, many ISVs, they haven't ported their code to be able to run on accelerators effectively yet. So in order to take advantage of those hardware, some users are having no choice but to explore open source applications. So for this, we're going to look first at the top ISV applications by vertical, then some of the motivators for ISV and open source, expand on those, and give some examples of the open source applications that are being used as well. So for the top ISV applications by vertical, we asked users in our multi-client studies over several years to list just their top 3 applications. So this is not an exhaustive list of all applications used. We have a separate database listing many applications that are used at a variety of HPC sites. But this is what they consider to be their critical applications. So there was a large breadth of answers in government lab, academic university, and other verticals. This is pretty typical, especially in academic and university, where the content area of where they're doing research may vary from site to site. So it's common to see some sites sharing an ISV with bio, for example, and other sites sharing an ISV with chemical engineering. Notably, some of the ISVs were well represented across multiple verticals. So I've given some examples here: biosciences, CAE, chemical engineering, and electronic design. So you can see that some of them are shared, like MATLAB and Ansys. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a couple of slides. There were also some verticals, such as digital content creation, economics, financial, and weather, that had fewer ISV applications listed. And they were more likely to list their top application as being either an in-house code or an open source application. But these are the most common for their ISVs. There are also, like we said, ISV softwares that were common across multiple verticals. So we've got some examples here. For example, Ansys was present in academic, CAE, electronic design, and government lab. So this, just to repeat, this means that at least one site in that vertical listed this program as one of their top 3 most important applications. MATLAB is another one that was very popular. It's present in academic, bio, CAE, chemical engineering, and electronic design. So in general, most of the respondents in our multi-client study, more than 3/4, do use software, ISV software, for at least part of their HPC workload. But on average, an HPC workload consists of only about 20% ISV software applications and then 40% in-house and open source, respectively. So over time, ISV software has been decreasing as percent of workload, while open source and in-house applications have been increasing. But as we mentioned before, the main metric for ISV use is their revenues, and spending is expected to increase about 4% in the next year. One reason is the demand for more differentiated resources. It's driving up the average number of HPC systems per site. And HPC sites that are using the cloud to adjust their expanding workload, often they value continuity between the applications that they're using on-prem and in cloud. So when licenses in the cloud are available, they often do choose it, although it does come with additional premiums, which is driving up that spending. And in general, users value ISV applications because they perceive them as being faster, more reliable, more accurate when compared with open source applications. So many users still rely on ISV applications. But as percent of workload, like we said, open source is becoming more popular. Nearly all HPC users reported using open source software at least some of the time. And in all verticals, some respondents reported that one of their top 3 applications was open source. This is more likely in certain verticals. So for example, academic, bio, economics, financial, electronic design, and weather, they were more likely to report a top 3 application that was open source. One reason that open source is becoming so popular is that ISVs tend to get more expensive as applications are scaled up. So more users, they're supplementing their workloads with open source in order to try to offset those costs, because as you scale up your HPC resources, the same ISV can cost you more over time. In the cloud, 19% of HPC users report that their cloud use is limited by either the availability and or the cost of ISV codes in the cloud. So what this is saying is that HPC users would like to use ISVs in the cloud more, but they can't for those reasons. And in general, open source is integral to HPC sites worldwide. So in general, many of the top open source applications, they originally came from publicly funded universities, and I should say they are now supported by a larger community. So some examples here of the top open source ones are below. GROMACS is an example. It's an academic, bio, electronic design, government, weather. Couple down, TensorFlow is actually an exception to that pattern of being university founded. Like we mentioned, TensorFlow was actually founded by Google. But it's also popular among many different verticals: academic, bio, digital content creation, electronic design, and other. And another type of application is programming languages. So 7% of users considered a programming language to be one of their top 3 HPC applications. And this is interesting because we haven't seen such a high focus on programming languages before. As far as which languages, MATLAB was the most popular to be listed in the top 3, but R and Python, equally popular, followed. And programming languages were more likely to be ranked in the top 3 within certain verticals, those being academic, bio, economics, financial, and electronic design. And when it comes to parallel programming, most sites use multiple languages, libraries, and APIs. So for example, at least half of sites use Python, C, C++, MPI, OpenMP. So the use of programming languages is really ubiquitous. In conclusion, the patterns of increasing cloud use and differentiated hardware are driving growth in both paid ISV software licenses and open source software as a percent of workload. Both of those, the new hardware and cloud, are challenging for HPC sites. So HPC sites are trying to offset those challenges. So one way of offsetting them is trying to use an application they're already familiar with on-prem to make the transition easier. Or if the ISV software itself is a challenge, HPC users are adapting to open source. Thank you.